Last week, the Minister of Education in Ghana, Honorable Haruna Iddrisu, announced that Ghana Education Service will make local languages the compulsory medium of instruction for all public schools in Ghana. He made this pronouncement in this big 2025. And I, for one, was confused by that. You know why? Local languages have been the medium of instruction in Ghana since 1925. Yes, for 200 years. Local languages are the official government policy language of instruction for schools in Ghana, right? There was a short period in the last 200 years where that wasn't the case, but from 2009 till date, that is the official government policy in Ghana. So it was confusing for me to hear the Minister of Education make an announcement about an issue that has been resolved for 200 years. It was also even more confusing for me to see that he made this announcement in a room full of people who work in education, and they clapped and cheered him on like it was the first time they were hearing that. And even more confusing for me was the fact that I saw the media report it like this was groundbreaking news that we've never heard in the history of Ghana before. And I went on social media and saw people cheering him on like this minister is the smartest person in Ghana, bro. He said something a white man said Governor Guggisberg made the policy of Ghana 200 years ago when Ghana was under colonialism. Why are we celebrating something someone is saying when the thing is just air coming out of his mouth? This is my issue with, Ghana. I don't have a problem with politicians being liars. Having a problem with a politician being a liar will be like me having a problem with a soldier knowing how to fire a gun. That is his job. What I have problem with is people not holding people in power accountable in Ghana. But before I go even further, let me introduce myself and walk you through the history of language policy in Ghana. My name is Nenebi Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I like to have intellectual conversations. So if you like to have intellectual conversations, subscribe to this channel. Now, let me start with, the first schools in Ghana were the castle schools, which were held in the Cape Coast and the Omina castles. First, it started as schools where Europeans were teaching other European kids. Then later they allowed the kids they had with their side chicks and other, women to come to those schools. And later on, they allow kids of their business partners to come to castle schools. But the history of education in Ghana goes beyond castle schools. I believe that missions or the Christian missionaries would be credited more for how they revolutionized education in Ghana. So the Basel missionaries who were in the Ekuapem and other Akan areas started schools over there. The Bremen missionaries in the Volta area also started schools around there. Guess what? The Basel missionaries were using Chi to teach in their mission schools, and the Bremen missionaries were using Ewe to teach in their schools. So in 1925, when Guggisberg became the governor of Ghana, in Ghana, if you learn about British governors, you learn about three people. You learn about George McLean, the first governor of the Gold Coast. You learn about Sir Commander Hill, the governor who signed the bond of 1844. And you learn about Guggisberg, the only governor who did good things for Ghana, right? We learn a lot about the good things that Guggisberg did. He built the Takrade port. He built the Achimota school. He built so many different things for Ghana, right? What we don't talk about a lot were the policies he implemented that changed Ghana. One of the policies he implemented was the Legislative Council, which was like a parliament for Ghanaians to be involved in the lawmaking process of Ghana. The second one were the educational policy, where he made it compulsory for the use of local languages in teaching basic school for the first 3 years. So from primary 1 to primary 3, local languages were supposed to be used to teach in public schools. I say public schools because at this point, mission schools were not considered public schools, right? So that was the policy of Ghana from 1925. And in 1951, we had a commission examine, the Ghana education system as it existed at that point. And the commission found that English language was a problem for Ghanaians. So they believed that for Ghanaians to learn how to speak better English, more English language should be used to teach in schools. So from 1951, we reduced from 3 to 1 year the number of years local language should be used to teach. So that was the policy from 1951. In 1957, when Nkrumah became president, Nkrumah said, you know what, that 1 year is too much. No local language for teaching schools. That is something I disagreed with Nkrumah with. But so from 1957, English language were the primary language of instruction until 1967. So for 10 years. So in 1961, there was an Education Act which Kwame Nkrumah implemented, where he brought back the 1 year in 1961. Because afterwards he realized that it wasn't the most logical policy he has implemented. So 1957, government of Ghana started a pilot project under military government. Yeah, we started a pilot project about going back to the 3 years, and so from 1967 we were using 3 years on a small basis, and we had the Education Act of 1971. I think 1971, Buzia was the president or the prime minister. Akufo was the president. And so that was the policy of Ghana from 1971. That was that the first 3 years of primary school would have local languages as the medium of instruction. So from 1971, that was the policy of the government of Ghana from 1971. And that policy continued. In 1987, we had a very massive educational reform in Ghana where we added kindergarten. We reduced from A-level, O-level to secondary schools, 1987 educational reform was the biggest educational reform in Ghana history. And even that left the 3 years local language in place. They didn't change that. And so in 1995, we have the F-Cube, Free Compulsory Universal Basic Education, which made basic education free and compulsory for all kids in Ghana. And again, under F-Cube, local languages were still emphasized. It was emphasized again. So now we are still using the 1971 Education Act. In 1995, it was emphasized again that local languages should be used as the medium of instruction for schools. 1995, NDC, President Rawlings. So I mentioned Buzia and Akufo-Addo from 1971 implementing that, Rawlings emphasizing that. I want you to understand that this is a bipartisan policy. It doesn't matter which government is in power. And so, 2002, Kufuor was the president, and Kufuor changed the policy. Kufuor made it a policy that English language should be used as the medium of instruction. Actually, I believe it was Ameya Ekumfi who made that policy that English language should be used as the medium of instruction in schools. Dumbest policy ever. And 5 years later, in 2007, we had the Act 778, the Ghana Education Act, which was implemented, and again, emphasized the use of local language from kindergarten to the first 3 years of primary school. So from kindergarten to lower primary. That is the policy that still stands till date. 2009, Atamils had the, I think, National Literacy Acceleration Program. And under the National Literacy Acceleration Program, he emphasized again the use of local languages. So every single government, with the exception of Kufuor for a short while and what was the name, Nkrumah for a short while, had local language policies. So the 2007 policy is the current policy of the government of Ghana, right? And so when the minister made that announcement, he was repeating a policy that has been in position from 2007. I believe Honorable Haruna Iddrisu was in parliament in 2007. So he was one of the people who voted on the Education Act 778. And so that means that he should have read it. So that means that he should know that that is the education policy of Ghana. So when he went and stood before a room full of highly educated educational workers and said, I am telling the Director General of Ghana Education Service to make this the policy from today onwards, what did he mean by that? That is what was confusing for me. You understand that? So if you understand the trajectory of our educational policies since I've walked you through, you understand that he did nothing. And doing nothing for me is painful. You know why it's painful? In education and in governance, there's something called duplication. And I've mentioned duplication before when I made a video the other day where I was talking about, the, what's the name, special prosecutor. I think I'll put it up here, where I mentioned that the special prosecutor's office was a duplication of roles of different government agencies. One form of duplication is when government keep making the same announcement over and over again. Every single government of Ghana have made this announcement. And every single time we fall for it like this is not the policy of government of Ghana for 200 years. There are other conversations to be had. In my next video, I'm going to talk about the history of culture education in Ghana, why we do not learn Ghanaian culture in schools. Maybe I'll post that on Wednesday. But even before I do that, there are so many different conversations we can have about education system. There are so many grand, big words he can use in that speech. But he chose to say something which is already been in position. That is my problem. One thing I've realized is it would have been easy for me to, be like I'm bashing the NDC. I like NPP. I don't like any of them, right? Actually, they didn't vote in 2020, even though I was in Ghana, because I weighed the two parties and none of them appealed to me. I would have voted for PPP, but Undum didn't run that year. And so this is what I'm going to start doing right now, pointing out this inconsistency, this useless use of our resources. Because he drove in our car that we paid for with our taxes, forward with our taxes, and when they delivered a speech and said nothing to us. I want to end here. Subscribe to my channel. This week, my next video I'll be posting will be about why lawyers in Ghana still wear the wigs, because it is related to why we don't know or we don't study culture in Ghanaian schools. I'm going to have, more conversations in that line. But before we do that, I'll talk to you later.